Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Commonwealth Club for today's program. My name is Melissa Kane. I'm a journalist and an attorney in the Bay Area, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. Now, we'd like to thank our members, our donors, and our supporters for making this and other programs possible. We're grateful for your support and their support, and we hope that others will continue to follow this example and support the Commonwealth Club. Now, as you may know, our special guest today is a former member of Congress, and I'm sure many of you have political questions. I know I certainly do, and I want to assure you we are absolutely going to get to some of those in today's program, but I just want to flag that we're going to start with actually talking about his new book. We are going to talk about that, and then we will get to some questions about today's current political climate and any other questions that you have related to that. So, to begin, when it comes to persuasion, we always, of course, want everyone to agree with us all the time. But how do we actually convince people that we're right? Well, today's guest is a former congressman who believes that one of the secrets lies in how you ask questions. His new book, It Doesn't Hurt to Ask, Using the Power of Questions to Communicate, Connect, and Persuade. He draws on his experience in the courtroom and the halls of Congress to teach us how to persuade, no matter the jury and no matter the cause. We're going to be discussing a lot in the next half hour, but I want to get your questions too. If you're watching along with us, please put a question in the text chat button on YouTube or in the comments on Facebook, and we are going to get to those later in the program. And so without further ado, let us introduce Trey Gowdy.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us here today. Let's start with a super softball question. It's a little early here on the for the Bay Area, so we'll start with an easy one. Just tell us how you came up with the idea to write a book about how to ask questions. It's not something we hear much about.
Well, Tim Scott and I wrote a book together on unity, which is also a kind of crazy idea for two people in politics, and so we kind of wanted to figure out whether could we write another book together, and it became clear he's so optimistic, so hopeful, and I'm such a cynic that it became clear we couldn't write another book together. And so we're leaving the restaurant. I'm driving back home, and we've concluded he's going to write a book about his life, and I'm going to go work on my golf game. And he called me before I even got to my driveway and said, "You need to write a book about what you're passionate about, not Congress, but about the courtroom and how to persuade." And so you're a lawyer, you know this. We spend most of our time trying to get things more concise. We take a paragraph and try to make it a sentence. Writing a book is a challenge because it's the opposite. You're trying to make it bigger. The real hard thing for me was, as a lawyer, I don't want to say it comes easy because I was terrible when I started as a prosecutor, absolutely terrible. But you do question whether or not you can explain the power of questions and how to ask them. And once I convinced myself that I thought I could, then I loved every second of writing that book.
Well, you sort of begin with a personal story about your best friend's mom and how someone's ability to ask the right questions really changed your life. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think to persuade most effectively, you do have to have a relationship. You have to think that the person cares about you or has your best interest in mind. And I had graduated college with a history degree, but knew no history at all. Had taken the LSAT, but had decided I wasn't going to law school. In fact, I got a really, really small scholarship to go, and I had returned it already. I just said, I'm not going. And we went on this beach trip, and she just kind of sat me down, grounded in love, which, most effective persuasion is grounded in something like that. And she just asked me, she was a stay-at-home mom. She was not a prosecutor. She wasn't a lawyer. She was a stay-at-home mom who just kind of said, what are you doing with your life? And what do you expect from yourself? And before I had left for the beach, took her about 30 minutes. And I decided I was going to go do the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life, which is ask my father to borrow money to go to law school. That is still the hardest thing I've ever done. He's a doctor. He was not thrilled about me going to law school. So Jo Evelyn Cox is the reason that I decided to go to law school. It took her about 30 minutes. And it was just asking questions. What do you want to do? What do you want to accomplish? Why aren't your expectations higher? You do have to have a relationship. It helps. But she pulled off more in 30 minutes than any of my academic advisors could do in 4 years.
So then you go to law school, you become a prosecutor, where, as you say, you had to learn. I think has to learn the art of asking questions, sort of what order to ask them in. And I don't know about you, but for me, I often will have a deposition or something, and I think one thing happened, and I walk out of the room and I go, yeah, and then I read it and I go, oh my gosh, I did not do what I thought I did. And how it's really hard to learn how to listen to get the right sort of back and forth.
I firmly think and believe that the next good question you or I will ask will come from something the other one said. So if you are so wed to your notes, now I'm a huge fan of preparation. In fact, I spent a lot of time in the book saying, if you don't know what you hope to accomplish with this conversation, then you're not going to accomplish it. And I mean, you have no way of judging success. So I'm big on preparation. I'm big on having an objective, but that objective can change in one answer. When I was in a courtroom, and a little bit in Congress too, although Congress is a terrible example because you only get 5 minutes, and 5 minutes is not enough time to do anything. But in a courtroom, I mean, you mentioned depositions. Imagine being in a criminal courtroom and you've never talked to the person before, and you have no idea what's going to come out of her or his mouth. So I drew this chart. If they say this, I'll go here. If they say that, I'll go there. The only rule I had was don't act surprised. Whatever the answer is, do not act like that's the first time you've heard it, even though that was the first time I'd heard it, because the jury wants to know that you're prepared and that you didn't say, oh, well, I never heard that before. Let's end the trial now. That's the one thing you can't do.
Well, I grew up watching Perry Mason. I always hope for that moment. But people can go off the chart and they can surprise you. I think if you're really asking questions as informed as you can be, but also with an open mind about why this person did a thing that they did or believe a thing that they do.
Well, speaking of being surprised, you can imagine my surprise. And I do tell this story in the book. It was my first capital case, and people have different opinions on the death penalty, and that's fine. I'm not even sure what my opinion is anymore. But nonetheless, you're going to be prepared. And the first time I heard that he only had one eye, he was my only eyewitness. So I had one eyewitness. And the first time I learned that one of his eyes was prosthetic was in a courtroom when I asked him, how is your vision? That was a shocking answer. I was not counting on there being a one eyewitness. But you've lesson learned. I ask all my other witnesses that now. Bank tellers used to look at me like I was crazy when I said, you got any vision issues? But you have to anticipate everything the audience or the jury is going to ask themselves. I mean, the best lawyers, the best persuaders have these debates and conversations with themselves weeks or months before it actually goes live.
Well, and I think there was a picture of you in that moment when you learned that your witness, who was the only eyewitness,
yes,
had a prosthetic eye. It's a keepsake now, right?
My staff gave it to me because there was no visible reaction. It was like I had heard it 100 times, and I was just making sure the jury knew that. I wasn't keeping anything from them. But the reality is I had never heard that before. And you're sitting there thinking, number one, how you're mad at yourself for not asking the question, doing the preparation. And then number two, you're mad at God for giving you in your first capital trial a witness who has a prosthetic eye. And you just got to figure out how to. The big thing I used to communicate to the jury was fairness, that I'm not here to get a conviction. I'm here to do the right thing. And that I'm not keeping anything from them. So you can't act like you're surprised. I mean, what I wanted to say is, what did you just say? But that's not what I said.
But the jury did believe the witness, though. He was still really credible. It seems like, despite that issue, really was confident in what he had seen, and as far as he could. Right.
Well, I never would have sought nor gotten the death penalty had that been the only piece of evidence. There was forensic evidence about who was there. So there was no doubt about the two people involved. The doubt was about what happened. Was it self-defense? Was it a robbery? And forensics can't tell you that, but the witness can. So had that been the only piece of evidence I had was a, one eyewitness, I'm not even sure I could have won a regular murder case with that. But because the jury believed the forensics, all I was asking them to do with this witness is understand the chronology of what happened from the time he walked into the store until the time he left.
Well, you do talk in the book, you tell some other personal stories about why it is you actually left the prosecutor's office to then eventually ran for Congress. Again, I know it's not exactly about asking questions, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, it's about asking questions from the standpoint that the toughest questions you should ever get in life should come from yourself. And if you are adept at asking yourself really tough questions about why you believe what you believe, and have you considered every alternative? And some people call it an inner dialogue. The problem when I do it is that it's audible. So people think I should go to a psychiatric hospital because I literally am having a conversation with myself, and it's out loud sometimes. The courtroom, when all you see is inhumanity, you think that's all there is. And you can tell yourself that, 90% of the people in the world are great, and you're just dealing with the 10% that aren't. You can tell yourself that, but it's all you see, and you get the proportions misaligned, and you think, every time you hear something outside, you assume the worst. And when your kids are late coming home, you assume the worst. And it takes its toll on your faith. And it did for me. It took a toll. When I say I'm a cynic, I am. And it came from just the questions about why. Why would a child have cigarettes put out on their face? Who would do that to a child? Who would kill someone that had done nothing wrong to them? And I could never answer the question. So it's either become a miserable person to live with, or go find another line of work. When you're going to Congress to improve your view of mankind, that the other job must have been pretty bad.
So tell me, how did your career with dealing with criminals prepare you for Congress?
I would have a hard time finding a single person in Congress that I didn't have a good relationship with. And that's the great myth that we don't share with the public. And I don't know why we don't share it with the public. The first thing I did when I woke up this morning was to see how a friend of mine did in a Senate primary in Massachusetts. And he did not win. So the next thing I did was send him a text. And you would never guess that I would be following that race or care about what happened to that person, because we never voted the same. And then we get on a text string and it's about half Republicans and half Democrats trying to see what we can do. And there's nothing you can do the day after a race, but what can we do a month from now or 3 months from now to kind of pick our friend back up? We get along much better than we want anyone. That doesn't mean we're not dysfunctional, and it doesn't mean we're effective, but this myth that we're constantly in a state of war with one another is just not accurate. And
well, you put on a pretty good show. It's like, I feel like it's pro wrestling sometimes. Everyone.
It is, but I will say this. I teach a class on Congress at a small liberal arts school, and I asked the kids last night, all right, who can name the most number of members of Congress? And somebody felt like they could name 30. And I said, well, you have 405 left to go. So are you really going to draw your opinions from such a small sample size? What you see on television are primarily leaders on the Republican and the Democrat side, or people who are most animated about that issue that night. What you don't see is this person who's on MSNBC going to dinner with this person who's on Fox 5 minutes after they get through saying what a terrible person the other one is. So, I mean, you're a lawyer, you know, we can do that. We can be mean to each other and go to dinner. Most people don't get that. But Congress is what? I mean, maybe 2/3 lawyers. Oh, I guess we're just better at doing it.
At hiding? Well,
At being disingenuous. Yeah, being disingenuous. Yes, we're better at it.
well, when you got to Congress, one of the things you talk about in the book is that when you're dealing with a jury, at least you have people who have sworn to have open minds, who have said they'll keep an open mind and really take everything in and try to make a decision based on the evidence. And then you get to Congress, and that's not the ability to persuade is very different there.
And even if you were successful at persuading, I'm not sure you would see any manifestations of that. And that is because one of two things: either we don't try to persuade our base, and I think politics now is almost all about the base. I mean, there's very little persuasion that takes place in politics. It is ratifying or validating what a group already believes, because almost all districts are primary districts. There are very few November districts. And if you don't win in the primary, I can promise you're not going to win in November. So is there, Tulsi Gabbard and I did an amendment together. All right. So she was one of my favorite people in all of Congress. There are these episodic examples of working across the aisle. But if you'll notice, Tulsi did not do well in the Democrat primary. And I certainly didn't run campaign ads saying, hey, look at me. I reached across the aisle and worked with a progressive Democrat from Hawaii. There's no reward in base politics to doing that. I get it all the time. I hear the question all the time. Why can't y'all work better together? Because the people that do the nominating in politics, that's not a high priority for them.
Well, yeah, we have this top two primary system in California. We're one of just a handful of states that have it. And it's interesting. There's the parties hate it and the public loves it. If you look at the polls in California, every couple of years, there's this effort to, and it's only state offices, right? We obviously can't do that for federal offices necessarily, but people who are regular people get that the primary does have this ability. The primary system really has this ability to warp public sentiment in the way it comes out.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, that y'all also have, your legislature doesn't draw the political lines in California. Y'all may, or maybe it's Arizona, but I know some states are experimenting with having non-political bodies draw the lines.
Yeah, that's a commission, and Arizona's is actually based on ours.
Okay. I worked for a federal judge that was on a panel that drew the lines in South Carolina because the legislature did not draw the lines correctly. And that was fascinating to watch. 3 federal judges who have lifetime jobs and don't need to worry about politics, how they decided to draw the political lines. You certainly can't do it on the basis of race, and you cannot dilute majority minority districts. The real question is, can you do it based on politics? And the arguments on both sides of that. I mean, do you really want to pit a bunch of Democrat incumbents against one another in California? I mean, do you want to pit Adam Schiff, Zoe Lofgren, and Nancy Pelosi against each other all in the same district? Or are 2 of them then going to move to other districts, which you have from time to time?
See that.
I think redistricting is probably what contributes to the partisanship more than anything else. Just having been there, 8 years, I would say it's redistricting.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Zoe Lofgren. She's, of course, a Bay Area representative, and you mentioned her as one of the more open-minded and sort of approachable people that you've worked with in Congress.
I loved her. She was smart. She was prepared. Zoe was actually up to be the chairperson of Judiciary and lost to Jerry Nadler. And that's kind of an inter-family battle.
Wow.
But I do wonder, watching impeachment, would it have been different? Zoe just has a different way about her. And I wish I had a nickel for every time she came and found me on the floor of the House and said, look, we don't agree on 99% of life, but I found this 1%. And can we work together on it? And there's such an authenticity about that. She didn't ask me to do anything that was going to get me in trouble back home, and I wouldn't ask her to do it. but she was really intentional about finding something we could do together. And she was one of my favorite colleagues. I think she's super smart. I like to listen to her ask questions. She's always prepared. And I don't know that I've ever heard her raise her voice.
Well, she's not, as someone who lives in the Bay Area and sort of covers politics, is interested in politics. She's not one that's going to be at every event. She's not a cut the ribbon, kiss the babies, always sort of out and about at different events kind of congressperson. She seems somebody who really is in there doing the really hard work of reading everything and doing the research and the less glamorous parts of being a member of Congress. That's at least just the perspective of someone who
that's a pretty good perspective. Zoe is not a look at me kind of person. Right.
Absolutely. Now, when we do have an audience question here that says, usually both sides are trying to persuade, especially I'm sure when you were in Congress. And do you approach that as a sort of win-lose outcome, or is there a way to sort of get to a win-win even when you've got an agenda of persuading the other person?
I think there are a few instances where both sides may be trying to persuade. I think what I notice more than anything else, first of all, we have to identify what group is still persuadable in our country. I mean, how big is that group of, quote, undecided voters? What I saw more than anything else was, how do we ratify our base, validate our base, keep them energized, and maybe possibly appeal to this group that we're not currently doing well with? That I saw this attempt to kind of navigate this really narrow path, but no matter what, you're not going to alienate your base. And that to me is what's wrong with politics now. Is I can't remember the last elected official that I thought was really trying to persuade people that did not agree with them. In other words, not get them to convert, but get them to say, you know what, I never thought of it that way. I'm not with you yet, but you've given me a different way of looking at it. I don't see an effort to do that in politics. There's an effort in every other facet of life, but in politics, when I watch the conventions or I see press conferences, it is primarily, I've got to keep this believed majority. I've got to keep it. And that's a very different dynamic than trying to actually persuade people that maybe you're not as bad as they thought you were.
And do you think that that's just a function of fear? People just trying to keep the voters that they have instead of really focusing on expanding and maybe risking the loss of some of those base voters to try to get new voters?
Yes.
Is there a lack of courage, do you think?
I think it is a function of primary politics. I would never have lost to a Democrat in my district. You could run any Democrat you want. I wasn't going to lose. I could only lose to a Republican that said I was not whatever enough. Mm-hmm. And in my district, it would be I was not conservative enough. And that's what I heard a lot. Even me, I heard it a lot. Mick Mulvaney heard it a lot. So you're so busy looking to your right or left in a primary. I mean, look, I mean, some chairpersons lost on the Democrat side. Neil, who's the chairman of Ways and Means, was in a tough reelect to the left. Elliot Engel, I think, lost, right? Chairman of Foreign Affairs. I mean, so these are chairpersons. Power used to mean something in Congress. I mean, for us to have a chairperson is a big deal for our district. Not anymore. If there's someone more progressive than you or more conservative than you, we're going to run you out. So you're not looking to the middle, you're looking to the sides.
Well, one of the things you talk about in the book is that persuading people really takes listening and really takes incremental change, that people don't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to do a 180 on this issue or that. And that may happen from time to time, but by and large, change happens slowly in small increments. And that's why asking the right questions to try and sort of lead them along even a little bit can be really helpful. What are some of the mistakes that you see people making when they think they're persuading or they're trying to persuade other people?
that they don't communicate their own persuadability. I mean, if I were to tell you that I have the right answers on gun control and you need to listen to me and I'm really not interested in what you have to say, my guess is you're not going to find me very persuasive. If I were to say, tell me how you think, what law could we pass tomorrow that would limit our exposure to mass killings? Then you're talking to me. I'm evaluating whether or not that really should be number one on your list. I'm evidencing to you that I care about your position, and I really do, because one of the mistakes that some folks on the other side make is they'll start with something that is not causally linked or connected to their desired outcome. So, but I have communicated to you that I am persuadable because I've asked you to tell me what you think. I begin lots of sentences with "I'm open to." I say it all the time. I am open to you convincing me I am wrong. I think the mistake people make is they confuse persuasion with proselytizing, that I really need this time to tell you how wrong you are. And what I should be saying is all the facts I have led me to this conclusion, but I am one fact away from believing that there's a better way. And now it's your turn. You go. And then with the power of questions, I mean, let's assume you pick the gun show loophole, which some people do. They say, well, that's what we need to do first. We need to close the gun show loophole. Fair enough. Consider it closed. How many mass shootings would that have prevented? Chances are they don't have the number. And when they find the number, they won't like it because it's not causally linked. So the questions, getting people to support, same thing you do in a courtroom. It's cross-examination, but without the, but with the air of, I need you to educate me. I need you to help me. I say it all the time. I need you to help me understand. Sometimes I mean it, sometimes I don't, but I always say it. I need you to help me understand. Persuasion requires us both to be persuadable, because I can't ask you to do something that I'm not willing to do. That's hypocrisy. And I can't think of anything less persuasive than hypocrisy.
Right. Or yelling at people, or thinking that this one fact is going to change everything. I think I see it on different sides of different issues where people are just, they go, oh, okay, well, if this one thing happens, then everyone will have to believe X. And that's probably not going to happen that quickly, that easily, with that, one, thing.
The number one thing I used to get asked at the grocery store, why don't y'all have a press conference and just lay out X? As if that's the only thing keeping us from winning the issue of the day, is we just need one more press conference. But it's those folks that are so wed to what they believe. But what you got to do is ask them, why do you believe it? I mean, give me the evidentiary basis for what you believe, and what other options have you considered? So maybe pick whatever issue it is. I mean, if they can't tell you, and it's got to be more than, well, I've always believed this, or my parents told me, or the preacher said it, that's not going to hold you in very good stead. I get in tons of trouble when I say this, so I'm going to say it again. I am one fact away from changing my mind on almost any issue. The bigger the issue, it has to be a really compelling fact, and you're going to have to establish it by a high level of evidentiary burden. But for me to say I am wed and I don't care what else is out there, I don't care what other facts are out there. I mean, honestly, can you think of anything less persuasive than for me to say, I don't, do not let the evidence interfere with my deeply held conviction? There's nothing less persuasive than that.
When I was reading this book, and when Abraham Lincoln first declared his intent to run for Congress, he wrote, you have to write a candidate statement. And in his candidate statement, and I'm paraphrasing because he wrote it much more eloquently than I'm about to say it, he said, I promise to change my mind if the facts warrant it. That was a selling point. at the time, not something to be hidden from public view. And how do we get because this is being driven by the voters who demand certainty and demand consistency regardless of whatever new facts have come out. What's the solution there when the voters are responding in this way?
You put your finger on it. The real persuasion that needs to take place in our country right now is not across the aisle in Washington. It is us going back home and talking to our bases. There was a senator from South Carolina who's no longer in the Senate who said, you just cannot survive politically telling your base they're wrong. So I probably would not lead by saying you're wrong. But there is a way. I mean, imagine you're at a town hall, and I did some of them until they just proved such a waste of time that I was not going to do them anymore. There's no persuasion that goes on there. But imagine you're at a town hall and somebody throws out a conspiracy theory, or it actually happened to me 2 weeks ago. I had somebody come, I'm not a conspiracy guy. So this QAnon thing, somebody asked me what I thought about it. And I said, well, I don't know anything about it. Tell me about it. And then I just began to question this person. So I never said, you're a lunatic, which is what I was thinking. What I did was, well, what's the evidentiary basis for that? And what's the evidence for that? And no, I'm not interested in a tweet, and I'm not interested in anything else that would not be admissible in court. What reliable evidence do you have to support the following notions? And they have none. So you first must persuade the voters. You put your finger on it. And it's one reason, I'm glad I don't ever have to face the voters again, because it's not smart to tell them that they're wrong or that they should view things differently. But you're not going to fix Washington. I mean, Washington reflects. It doesn't lead, it reflects. And it's not popular to say we get what we ask for, but the reality is we get what we ask for. And if you don't like the leadership you have in DC, the first person you need to look at is yourself.
Well, one of the frustrations with watching people in Congress, and maybe you experienced this, you mentioned before, you get 5 minutes, and you're in a hearing, and it can be frustrating. I can tell you as a sort of civilian, you see the media reports, Tim Cook and Mark Zuckerberg they're going to Capitol Hill, they're going to get grilled, but it never happens. It's really just such a disappointment every time to watch members of Congress make speeches, ask questions where they don't even listen to the answers. I mean, they just seem really incapable, and I mean this across the political spectrum, of actually listening, asking good questions, and sort of engaging in that when they get that moment to actually ask the questions. Was it frustrating for you as a prosecutor to then sort of be up there watching your coworkers do the same thing?
Structural, yes, frustrating, just for lack of my ability to use an NC-17 word. Yes, it was frustrating. We'll go with that. But I also was part of it. So you have a choice. When I became the chairman of the Oversight Committee, we had fewer of those spectacle hearings. Now, what constituencies do you offend when you have fewer public hearings? The media hates it because they can say what they want, but they love these hearings. They absolutely love them. People who are ambitious on both sides of the aisle love the hearings because they have their YouTube moment. Staff love the hearings because it's so ad hominem. So I compare the depositions I did behind closed doors, no time limits, no, interrupting the witness, compare those with the public hearings. And there's no comparison in which produce more information. But the media belittles you if you want depositions or transcribed witness interviews. They belittle you. So across the board, there's an appetite for this theater. There's no other facet of life where we say this is really important. We're talking about encryption or the social media giants, or we have Bill Barr with us or Eric Holder. Super important. So let's just give everyone 5 minutes. There's just a complete disconnect. it's important so you have less time than it takes Mick Mulvaney to line up a putt. There's a huge disconnect. When I say it's structural, there's an easy way to fix that. Easy way to fix it. Simple. Republicans, you get an hour. Democrats, you get an hour. You can spend it however you want. And then what you begin to hear are those individual members who may not be good at asking questions, and they're going to lose their 5 minutes of fame. So you're going to find the people who are good at asking questions, like Zoe, and there are people on the Republican side very good at asking questions, but people who aren't good, but want their YouTube moment or want their base moment, they're cut out. It's an easy fix. It doesn't require a constitutional amendment. You get an hour, we get an hour. You can have the same person in an hour, you can get somewhere. You can't get everywhere, but you can get somewhere. 5 minutes is a joke.
Well, it seems like the folks who might get cut out of that are the same folks who are probably not gonna go for that rule change. How did you find the preparation among your fellow members of Congress? Because one of the things it seems like when they're just reading a speech or reading pre-prepared questions that they're not listening to the answer to, that they're just reading the question for its own sake, and then no matter what the person says, they're going to be on to the next question. I always wonder, did someone else write these for you? Are you not even taking the time to really get ready for this hearing?
Like every other group, there are really, really good ones, and then there are ones that don't prepare at all. I had colleagues that for every minute they were in the congressional hearing room would spend an hour outside of it, and you could tell who they were. And they wrote their own questions. And then what you'll see, if you notice carefully, you will see staff walking around. And that's not their fault. They're not being egoist. They know that certain members are relying on them to give them the questions. Well, there's nothing less authentic than reading someone else's question when you have, but it's either that or the person's not going to ask anything or not ask anything constructive. I had a rule when I first got there, and staff would come up to me. Of course, you sit in order of seniority. So the younger you are, all the good questions have already been asked. They've been asked multiple times when you sat where I sat. But I would have staffers come up, and they would say, they were real timid, and they would say, Mr. Gowdy, we have some questions that have not been asked yet. And I always had the same reaction. I said, remind me again how many trials you had in federal court. And then how many did you have in state court? And these, of course, they're fresh out of college. They ain't even been to law school. They have none. I said, well, when you have the same number I have had, then I'm going to take your questions. In the meantime, I'm going to ask the ones that I wrote out. If you stay, you can pick these lanes that have not been taken yet. The easiest questions are the ones that the most senior people ask because they're obvious. And all the good ones are taken. Preparation, Peter Welch from Vermont, always incredibly prepared. Hakeem Jeffries, Cedric Richmond, Jim Jordan would prepare weeks before a hearing happened. So would the president's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, not a lawyer. So he felt the need to kind of over prepare. You can tell who's prepared, even if you don't like what comes out of their mouth, you can tell who's prepared and who's not.
Well, even for some of the folks who do come off as prepared, they aren't always there for the entirety of the hearing as well. It's so deflating when they get sort of the pullback camera shot and no one else is in the room. They've either asked their questions and left, or because their time to speak hasn't come up yet, they're not present at the hearing.
Can I defend them for 1 second on that?
1 second.
1 second. Some members are on a bunch of committees. I was on 4. And if you don't show up for the committee hearing, they'll use it against you politically and say you didn't even care enough to show up. So if you have 3 committee hearings all at the same time, you do feel the need to participate in all 3. Now, that wasn't very many folk, but John Ratcliffe, who's now in the DNI, was on 4 committees. And when you're on House Intel, you're away from your phone. You're down in a skiff away from your phone. And if you don't show up, that's a big deal because these are intelligence matters. Some of the members were not there because they're really busy. And some of the members were not there just because they weren't there. So don't judge them all by being absent. But your point is well taken. You can't just show up, read your 5-minute soliloquy, and then leave.
Right. I mean, it looks bad, and I get your point. That's a fair point. It can be a little heartbreaking when you get this person who's up there making these fiery statements and questions, and then they're not even staying to what it looks like, and maybe they go back later and read the transcript. And so
of course they don't. No, they do not either.
Nice.
No, they don't.
Well, speaking of good people to grill, to do some grilling and hearings, we've got, of course, California Senator, Bay Area native Kamala Harris, now who's the VP. She got a lot of attention for her questioning abilities in Congress and in the Senate. What do you make of her sort of rise, based at least in part on her ability to ask questions?
Well, I mean, she's a former prosecutor, so you expect them to be quick on their feet. I think what prosecutors like Senator Harris can do is separate what are relevant facts, what are important facts. I mean, when I hear her question witnesses, she doesn't have 5 minutes, but she doesn't have unlimited time either. They have a little bit more in the Senate, but she knows exactly where she is going. And the best questioners start with a purpose. And whether it's Jeff Sessions or Bill Barr or Brett Kavanaugh, she knew before she opened her mouth what her objective was. She's also very bright, so she knows who her jury was. Was her jury undecided voters? Was her jury the base? Was her jury the Democrat nominee who might be looking for a vice president? Of course, I think she ran for president also, so her jury may have been Democrat primary voters. Look, I know people don't like lawyers, but there's a reason we have them, and they are pretty good at sizing up who the jury is and then how to effectively communicate to them. So she and I probably don't agree on a whole bunch of things, but I like watching good lawyers, and she's good.
Well, here's hoping other folks will see that asking good questions is also a really good way to have a YouTube moment, listening and asking those follow-up questions can also be helpful. You don't have to just sort of read a script when you're up there. We do have a question from the audience here. It says, when we live in a world of sound bites and 1-minute videos and 280 character tweets, how can we persuade people to spend a little time investigating before formulating their opinion?
That's a great question. I hate the culture that we live in. I hate how superficial it is. If I were on Twitter a lot, and I'm not, but if I were, I would use the question, how do you know that? I do it with people in my own life who are on social media a lot, some of whom are related to me. I would just say, how do you know that? And what are the limits of your knowledge? And so then you begin to test if they respond back, well, I read it. Well, what tool do you and I use to elucidate the truth? It's examination and cross-examination. So I love to ask people, how do you know that's true? When I was having this conversation about this QAnon conspiracy theory, I must have asked that 100 times. How do you know whether that's true or not? Okay, I get that you read it. I get that it's, in print. My parents, God bless their soul, the worst thing that ever happened was them getting an email, because every email they're forwarded, they think, well, no, somebody wouldn't lie. When they tell us that you have lifetime salary because you serve one term in Congress, they wouldn't lie about that, would they? Yes, Mom. Yes, they would. How do you know that? You can't simply. So what would I do if I were on Twitter? How do you know that? What are the limits of your knowledge? Have you asked them? Is there any evidence on the other side? Are there any studies that indicate otherwise? When I read headlines now, use the word grill. That word is used more by the headline writers at Politico and The Hill than any other place. Even outdoor grilling companies don't use the word grill more than Politico and The Hill. And if you watch it, it's really not a grilling. They may be just good, fair questions, but they need you to click. So what I'll tell folks, if you want a higher level of discourse, require it. Don't engage with people. If they won't answer, how do you know that? They're probably not worth your time.
Well, it's interesting. We in California, we've gotten more and more decline to state. That's our sort of not Republican, not Democrat voters is the largest, is growing the most of any sort of party that we have out here. The Republican Party is as shrunk down to a size. It hasn't moved much. The Democrats are shrinking a little bit, but it always struck me that the fact that you're a member of a party, why should your opinion on one thing automatically lead to your opinion on the other thing? And a good example would be, why would your opinion on abortion rights influence your opinion on foreign affairs? Or, you know what I mean? There seems to be some group of people who are willing to sort of just buy the whole party line instead of stopping to say, wait a minute, what does this have to do with what I truly agree with the party on? And why am I just sort of espousing this view because my friends are telling me to, or because other members of my party are telling me to? Are they really connected? There have to be more than just two blobs of ideology in the world, right? And I think maybe this, the elusive independent, as you point out, is really the only moderately persuadable person left.
Well, in terms of getting, the big prize, which is the vote, yes, it'd be very tough for me to convince someone that was pro-life to vote a Democrat in most House races. It'd be tough. In the old days, you could be fiscally conservative, socially moderate. You would hear that from time to time. That's a dying breed. What I've noticed, and again, if you don't listen to anything else I tell you, and there's a good chance that that's going to be true, but trust me when I tell you this, politics reflects. It reflects what they think the voters want. And my fear now is that 99 is a failing grade on both sides of the aisle. When I see my friend in Massachusetts portrayed as not being sufficiently progressive, when he may have been the most progressive House member I worked with, or when pardon me?
Is it Kennedy?
Yeah, Joey.
Yeah.
Joey.
Yeah. Okay.
Joey to me was the most authentically progressive person that I worked with, but he lost a primary because he wasn't progressive enough. And then you see Republicans where 99 is a failing grade. And so is that the fault of the candidate, or is that the fault of the people who pick the candidate? The easy thing for me to do is to blame members of Congress. That's easy. I could survive a long time doing that. But politics reflects, and evidently they think that's what the voters want. So it's incumbent upon the voters. I mean, I don't know how many people listening today split their vote. I mean, how many of them vote all R, all R or all D? If you want to send a message and confuse politicians, then start flipping up your ballot a little bit.
Interesting advice there. I do have another audience question here. And actually, I want to just take a minute to talk a little bit about the Benghazi hearings, because you do talk about that in the book, about how it went for you, how maybe you would have done things differently. So let's just stop for a minute. And before we ask, there's a question that's sort of related to it, to have you discuss the role of questions in the Benghazi hearings.
Well, that was the seventh. I'll give you both sides of the issue to the extent I can. It was the seventh investigation. So if you're a Democrat, you're very frustrated at the fact that this has already been looked into multiple times, reports written by other Republican chairpersons. And so that would be the Democrat side. The response to that would be, all of that's right. Factually, you're 100% correct. How did they miss the following things? Because none of the other seven read Ambassador Stevens' emails. So if you agree that Ambassador Stevens' emails would be relevant to what he was thinking, why he went to Benghazi from Tripoli, his emails may help. But if you haven't read them, you won't know what's in them. And if you didn't bother to ask for them. So I kind of justified in my mind that there were questions that, despite the number of investigations, still existed. So you're fine to say, well, the Republican chairperson didn't do a good job investigating it. You're fine to say that. I would rather you say that than to say that the questions weren't worth answering. Where I made mistakes in my mind, there were multiple ones, but I was slow to send subpoenas. I really thought, if you view this as the deaths of 4 Americans, just take her out of it. These are the deaths of 4 Americans. Take the secretary out of it. Finding out what happened, can it be prevented, lessons to be learned, then to me it was like a homicide case. And I know how I used to work homicide cases, and it wasn't in public hearings. So I was on with, I don't know if it's Colbert or Bill Maher, or one of those guys that's crazy about me. And he mentioned all the public hearings we had in Benghazi. We had 103 witness interviews. Over 100 were done behind closed doors. We had one really high profile hearing, which was a disaster, by the way. And that was Secretary Clinton. All the rest were done behind. Leon Panetta was done behind closed doors. Ben Rhodes was done behind closed doors. Susan Rice was behind closed doors. I got a lot of flack from Republicans. They wanted Susan Rice done in public. They wanted that spectacle that you and I talked about. I wanted 3 hours with her so I could understand what happened. So I got the jury wrong. I thought that if you did things a certain way, that even your critics would grudgingly say, all right, well, you're not just in it to embarrass the following people. First hearing we had, the Washington Post was complimentary, which is the 7th sign of the apocalypse. But Dana Milbank wrote an op-ed piece, this is the way congressional hearings should be run. That was the first one we had. And then we had another one. And then it became clear to me, meanwhile, look, I'm getting pressure from the right that, we're not necessarily looking for you to run the hearings this way. And I think the Democrats were getting pressure. Elijah, whom I loved, God rest his soul, I think Elijah was getting pressure. We don't need Republicans receiving positive press in the Washington Post. That is not in our best interest. So we began to fight a little bit publicly, never privately, but a little bit publicly. When her email was discovered, by the way, by the New York Times, not a bunch of right-wing nut jobs, the New York Times wrote the first story about her email. I knew that she had private email, but we didn't leak it. New York Times wrote the story. I knew that the whole dynamic would change, and it did become about her and not about 4 people who died and those that survived. But if you ask me to give the one fact, if I get one fact to a jury to try to convince them that the report is worth reading, we mention her name less times than the Democrats mentioned Donald Trump's name in their Benghazi report. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, Donald Trump didn't have anything to do with Benghazi. You're right. He didn't. But his name was mentioned more in the Democrats' report on Benghazi than we mentioned Clinton's name in ours. So if you read the report, I think you will find it to be what we wanted it to be, which is the definitive accounting of what happened. You cannot investigate anything in the current political environment. Bob Mueller found that out, and I found that out.
What do you make of a so to fast forward to today, one of the audience questions is that these COVID hearings, are they helpful? I mean, to your point, are we able to even have objective public airing of facts about even something as sort of scientific, as medical, as critical as COVID-19?
I don't think so. I think the brokenness of our current culture and the political environment is best evidenced by the fact that really the only thing that matters is winning. And we have managed to politicize sporting events. We have managed to politicize. I was one of the first ones that said the officer in the George Floyd case should be charged with murder. I mean, as a prosecutor, I looked at it and I thought that was the proper charge. What happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin, I did my podcast yesterday on the 20 questions that need to be answered. But it's too easy to politicize everything. And if we can use this, I mean, I really can't think of anything that should be less political than a virus. I mean, I'd have a hard time thinking of anything that's less overtly political than a virus. But that's just the world we live in, and I'll let other people figure out whose fault it is. That's probably above my pay. I think it's everyone's fault, quite frankly. And winning, look, you and I are both from the justice system. So if cops get it wrong, even though they have the right person, the evidence is excluded, the confession's thrown out. We'd rather let 99 guilty people go free than convict a single innocent person. That's the justice system. It's not about winning. Politics is about winning. And that, unfortunately, is about all it's about right now. So whatever it takes to win is what the two sides are willing to do.
It reminds me of there was that famous clip of John McCain during the 2008 election cycle. He's doing a town hall, and there was a woman who, I think, and forgive me, I'm paraphrasing here, but said that Barack Obama was a terrorist or Muslim. And John McCain said, no, he's not. And sort of fact checked her right in that moment, and was held as a hero for that. And it was, an important and I think good reaction. But
I'll give you another example just to show.
With newsworthy is so amazing.
I'll give you a recent example just to show. I try to be fair. Joe Biden said Mike Pence was a decent man, and he got excoriated for it. Kudos to him. Look, I wouldn't vote for him. I mean, I wrote about it in my book. I would never vote for Joey Kennedy. Joey Kennedy would never vote for me. We should not vote for each other. We have different views of the role of government, but I would trust him with the most important things in my life. And sometimes that's enough for a relationship. I got family members that wouldn't vote for me if I ran again. They shouldn't vote for me. I mean, I don't represent what they want. So why would they vote for me? But it doesn't mean you can't have a relationship. I think now, if you're on the other team, you just must be all bad.
Well, you said the B word, so I do want to go ahead and get your take on what is happening right now with the current election. We have an audience question here that says, if you could give Democrats one piece of advice heading into 2020, what would it be?
Well, they'd be crazy to take it. But I think, and I think they figured this out recently, I think that whether you call it safety, whether you call it security, whether you call it law and order, you can call it what you want. And apparently some of those phrases are okay now and some of them are not. That there is a large swath of voters that care very much about having an orderly society. And I think you saw that yesterday, the fact that the vice president addressed it. So, my advice to Democrats, I know they think the pandemic is a good issue for them. I know they think that the leadership style of Donald Trump is a good issue for them. They would not be wise to overlook even moderate, maybe even progressive folks' view that we cannot have a society where creating more innocent victims is the answer to an innocent victim. We cannot have that society.
Well, we have reached the point in our program where there is time for one last question, and it's a great one from our audience. And it is, what is one question that you think should be asked at the presidential debates this year?
Oh, you're going to think this is a cop-out, and maybe it's just because I've gotten old and gotten soft, but I would make them say something that they respect about the other one. I would make them do it. I wouldn't let them off by saying you have good kids. I would, and if it had to be policy, I tell the most from someone by asking, what do you view the role of government to be as opposed to the responsibility of the individual? That would be the one question I would ask of any candidate. Because if I understand how you view the role of government, as opposed to what my individual responsibilities are, I have a better idea of whether you're persuadable. I had a kid last night in the class. He thinks that government should provide everything. I'm probably not going to persuade him. Probably not. What is your view on the role of government and its responsibilities versus the individual, it's just they're both so adept at not answering the question. I mean, they would pivot from that. You know what I would do to change the debate? I would have them question each other. And I know I should not say that because I'm talking to somebody that's done a brilliant job asking questions, but there's no substitute for that kind of questioning one another in more than 60 seconds to answer. I mean, healthcare is complicated. I don't think 60 seconds is going to get it done. I'd love to see candidates question one another.
Well, you say that here in San Francisco, I've moderated debates among mayoral candidates and in other races. And that's always a real audience favorite when we ask the candidates to ask each other questions. You can really, get some interesting answers, questions, and certainly fireworks sometimes as a result. So I think that would be a ratings boon. And so
it would be a ratings boom. It might be the end of our republic, but it would be a ratings boom for sure.
Wow, with a bang. Alrighty, on that happy, hopeful note, our many thanks here to Trey Gowdy, former congressman, author of this new book, It Doesn't Hurt to Ask, Using the Power of Questions to Communicate, Connect, and Persuade, for joining us today. Copies are available everywhere books are sold, so make sure you grab one. And we want to thank you to the audience for watching today and participating live. And if you want to watch more programs or support the Commonwealth Club's efforts at making virtual programming available, please visit thecommonwealthclub.org/online. I'm Melissa Kane. Thank you everyone for joining us. Stay safe.